Good afternoon. My name is John Pfeffer. I'm the supervisor for the town of Ashford, and I want to welcome you all to this webinar today. I want to start with mentioning that this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the ECA YouTube channel. Before we get into the discussion, I want to briefly frame this conversation from both a personal and community perspective. I serve as town supervisor in Ashford, New York, home to the West Valley Demonstration Project, part of the Western New York Nuclear Service Center. West Valley began in the 1960s with tremendous promise. It was supposed to demonstrate commercial nuclear fuel reprocessing in the United States and become a key part of the closed fuel cycle. That effort ultimately did not succeed in the way it was envisioned, and the community has lived with the cleanup and stewardship responsibilities ever since. But I don't see West Valley as just a failure. I see it as an unfinished chapter. Our community has spent decades supporting federal cleanup work, developing expertise in nuclear operations, and asking hard questions about what a complete nuclear fuel cycle really requires. That experience makes communities like mine cautious, but it also makes us informed partners in conversations like this one. Today, we're discussing DOE's recent request for information on nuclear fuel cycle innovation campuses. The RFI suggests a future where multiple parts of the fuel cycle, enrichment, fabrication, recycling, research, storage, could potentially be co-located or coordinated across regions. That is a very different approach than what existed when West Valley was built when pieces of the fuel cycle were developed more independently. And it raises some very real questions for communities. Most local officials are not nuclear engineers. They're trying to evaluate complex technologies, understand siting requirements, and assess risk while also protecting their communities and economic futures. That's really the purpose of today's conversation. From the Energy Communities Alliance perspective, this discussion comes down to three core issues. First, technology assessment. How communities understand what these technologies are and what they actually mean on the ground. Second, siting, how companies evaluate locations and how can communities realistically position themselves to participate. And third, risk sharing, how communities, companies, and governments ensure that projects are durable and that host communities are not left holding the bag if policies or markets change. Those are the issues we're going to explore with our panel today. How will collaboration among private companies and community leaders strengthen the delivery of a resilient nuclear fuel cycle? Our goal is not to advocate for any single model, but to explore how public-private collaboration can strengthen proposals, reduce risk, and build durable local support. Thank you. I'm going to start with our first question, and I'm going to go to Bill Goodwin. I'm going to say, what was your initial thought when you saw the RFI come out for the nuclear fuel cycle innovation campuses?
Thanks, John. Yeah, well, Bill Goodwin, I work with Oklo, a leading SMR developer, who also we have a lot of investments we're planning on making in the fuel cycle, which is part of the reason why the campus vision, when it emerged, was so intriguing for us. I think one of the interesting challenges that those of us in the industry who are more risk on have been trying to find places where people see a bigger picture for the opportunity with advanced nuclear. I think, as John mentioned, and as no doubt those communities that have experienced nuclear in the past know that there's a long legacy of projects that have either declined in their scale and the amount of economic impact, the jobs, et cetera, or there's been false starts at different times with different projects. And I think one of the great benefits that we saw coming out of the RFI announcement was a real change in the kind of whole of government commitment to finding places where you could put the entire fuel cycle to work. Of course, the other thing that it did raise was a lot of questions about what was the ultimate corporate impact, how are communities going to lean in and support this, both at the local level and at the state level, and what exactly does it mean coming from the federal response? And I'd say a lot of those questions, particularly when it comes to the federal enthusiasm, have been answered in a really positive way. And I think the considered take is that we see this as a great convening mechanism to try to find the most creative ways to bring to life the entirety of the nuclear fuel cycle all the way through to actually power generation, with a lot of creative industrial policy support that we're seeing elsewhere in the economy. So net bullish, I'd say, John, net bullish.
Thank you very much. Curtis, same question. What was your initial thought when you saw the RFI?
I'm Curtis Roberts, VP Communications with Orano USA. And as a company that represents the entire nuclear fuel cycle, this is very exciting. Very exciting to see the US government thinking about the opportunities throughout the nuclear fuel cycle instead of only the challenges and those that may stymie growth, but then flipping that and now seeing the economic opportunities, the real economic opportunities. We've been recycling for decades. So we understand that one can close a fuel cycle and can do it well with a community around our facility that raises cows. That's a farming community. So obviously this can be done safely. It can be done safely for many, many years. So these economic opportunities where you could cite multiple aspects of the nuclear fuel cycle in one location just brings up a lot of interesting ideas. We've always had the perspective, you'll see it on our social media, the hashtag, it's only waste if you waste it. And it's exciting to see the US government now looking to the states and saying, let's all get creative together. What does this look like with creative ideas of a mix of economic opportunity, research and development, all of the value that a concept like this can bring? So for us, very exciting. I echo Bill, very bullish on this, very interested in seeing how these creative ideas can be pursued. Seeing that can be a challenge, but I think it's a huge opportunity.
Thank you. And finally, Rod, same question. What was your initial thought when you saw that RFI come out?
Yeah, I'm Rod Baltzer. I'm the CEO of Deep Isolation. And so for Deep Isolation, we provide disposal for the end fuel, very end of the back end in boreholes. So this can be co-located, and that allows communities or states to manage just their waste and not the entire national repository. So when we saw the request for information come out, focused kind of on the back end and looking at disposition of fuel, we thought this was a real opportunity. It finally kind of started the discussion on the back end. We really believe that if you spend just a little bit of time now as you start planning for new nuclear, but think about how that integrates into the back end, what you're going to do with that fuel, and how you're going to finally disposition it into a deep geologic repository of some kind, whether that's a mine or a borehole. That's really going to save a lot of time and effort and headaches and put all that path in front of you. So glad we get to start this conversation.
Thank you. So as we talk more about technology assessment, and I think I'll stick with Rod on that. How are you educating audiences that may be near a development site about your technology?
We've created a brochure. It's a two-page PDF about our technology, what boreholes mean, how you would interact with those, and kind of that kind of information. That's available if you want to email info@deepisolation.com. We're happy to send that out to those that are interested. And then we've got a lot of information on our website as well with technology publications, peer-reviewed journals, and things. And that's been the way we've been interacting as well as one-on-one calls for those that are interested.
Thank you. And to Bill, how is Oklo doing that educating audiences?
I think it's taken a variety of forms. Obviously, we're making ourselves available to anybody who does have questions. We've done a really aggressive outreach to a variety of different states that we had previous relationships with, as well as other states that we think are going to be interested in supporting the project. And I think one of the things that I'll flag for both this group and then as a general point is that we really see the opportunity not just now before the first phase of the RFI, but what's going to come afterwards as an ongoing evolution of the kinds of proposals that are going to be most interesting at the federal government level, and then the insights and clarity that states and localities are going to see about the benefits to their ecosystems are going to become a lot clearer in the days and weeks to come, particularly even after the initial close of the first round of the RFI. So I guess the two offers that I would make is that one, we're willing to hop on a plane and bring our team, on site and talk with folks as needed to really explain the benefits, or hop on a Zoom at any given moment. But I think also we're just focused on building relationships that are going to be, durable beyond, the next couple of weeks, because we see that the evolution of not just the initial responses, but also the potential for collaboration between different states is likely to continue throughout the subsequent phases of this RFI.
Thank you. And Curtis, finally, how is Orano doing that audience education? where they might be near a development site for your technology?
Certainly. So as I mentioned, we are both ends of the fuel cycle. We've got an active project in Tennessee in Oak Ridge called Project Ike, developing a $5 billion uranium enrichment facility there with very active community outreach, interaction with the state level stakeholders. When you have a great story to tell, you're looking for opportunities to tell it. And so we do outreach and integration or communications at every opportunity, even so much as to look at workforce development, going into the schools and speaking with the teachers and the students. So it is a broad effort there as an existing project. On the back end, we've had used fuel management for many, many years. Both the storage at the nuclear reactor sites and transport cask and casters, the entire portfolio there. So again, it's another good story. 60 years of managing used nuclear fuel here in the United States without a single harm to people or the environment. So a strong story to tell. And for recycling, again, we've done that for many years. And speaking with states and other entities that are interested in exploring recycling, reprocessing first, taking apart the fuel, and then recycling, gleaning the valuable isotopes out of it. And that can be for nuclear energy. It can be for creating space batteries, medical isotopes. So applying and making available our expertise on the back end of the fuel cycle to those that are interested.
Thank you. You mentioned something there that I don't think a lot of people understand about the whole nuclear product cycle, that is the medical isotopes and those sort of things. How can you, and I'll stick with you, Curtis, how can your company help communities accurately scope these technologies, and what might be misunderstood about open or closed fuel cycles?
So I'll start with the back end there, the last part of your question. The open and closed part of the fuel cycle is all about the waste. And what do you do with it? Do you see it as a valuable commodity, or do you see it as something that needs disposal? By recycling used nuclear fuel, you reduce the volume by 5 times of what you're going to have to eventually put away. So that's significant for any future repository or disposal strategy. Significant there. Why recycle it? Because of all those valuable isotopes in there. We have processes, as I mentioned, for gleaning out americium-241 for space batteries. There's all sorts of other medical isotopes that can be pulled out. For example, our MOU with Shine Technologies is focused on how they commercialize different stages of their process, their development process to find those valuable isotopes and to commercialize them. So those opportunities all marry up with R&D all the way through. So then you're engaging your educational institutions. So wherever one of these sites is located, the ripple effects for it are across multiple economic avenues and educational aspects. And so communities should start getting a sense as to what that value is. Part of our challenge is to define that for them, to let them understand economically, educationally, lifestyle, all of those type of beneficial aspects and how they can be elevated with one of these concepts.
Thanks. Rod, the same question. My community could, I don't know that we'd be a deep borehole candidate, but how can you help communities scope those things? And
Yeah,
what might be misunderstood?
yeah. When we look at open and closed, I think the most misunderstood thing is that recycling and reprocessing can eliminate all of the waste. You do not need a deep geologic repository, but that's not true. There's still some remnants left that do require that, but it is a smaller volume, which is where boreholes make this more interesting. With that smaller volume of waste and the modular capabilities we have, we don't have to construct a huge repository. It can be tailored for whatever that need is. So on the call, you see Oklo and Orano with us on the panel. All of us, Deep Isolation has worked with both of them on their technologies and how that may integrate in with borehole disposal and economics and things associated with that. Whether a community, what we found also with boreholes is the deeper you go, the more geologies open up. It's safer more at depth. And so there's definitely studies to be done and things to discuss. And it's an exciting time to be in this part of the fuel chain.
Thank you, Rod. And Bill, finally for you, how can Oklo help us with that same issue with misunderstandings about those fuel cycles, but also helping communities scope those fuel cycle technologies?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of elements that have already been hit on by Curtis and Rod, but just to reiterate on the recycling piece, the real value here is thinking less about closed versus open and more about the terminal problem that you have to deal with. And that's where recycling does play an interesting role, and where the RFI is flexible enough, I think, to allow different actors to kind of use different resources. Obviously, we get the impression that the federal government would love as much of this to be co-located or reasonably proximate as possible, which does pose interesting kind of geographic challenges because what makes sense, for all sorts of reasons, for a borehole is going to be very different, perhaps than kind of the set of parameters that we were looking at for recycling facilities when we just went through a 2-year siting exercise. Ended up with our first recycling facility actually in Oak Ridge, so we'll be neighbors to Curtis. We fully expect to dominate the Orano softball team. I'm throwing that down, Curtis, but but I do think uh, a key important thing to remember is the recycling does reduce the scale of the challenge dramatically. The Both the radioactivity and the size, the absolute mass of the waste are going to be diminished. And it also changes, the economics associated with the entire fuel cycle in a positive way. There's certain externalities that can be kind of cross-subsidized by some of the other goods that come out of the recycling ecosystem. So I think that's one of the areas where looking at the campus holistically should give actors the opportunity to think more creatively about what's the story they can tell to their community about the negative impacts and then the overall economic benefit of these campuses. The other piece that I would just throw out there is notwithstanding kind of the preference on the contiguous or kind of geographically or regionally proximate nature of the campus concept through the RFI. I think some of the elements, recycling being a good example, are depending on time, distance, and other logistics. Those are things that we don't fully expect to be exclusively in one place. And so I could see a universe where there's double tapping into facilities that are in one campus, and then a separate campus doesn't have to actually reproduce the full exercise on the fuel cycle. So just kind of an open invitation to think with a certain degree of creativity, especially states where, it might be cross-border, but they might be more or less regionally approximate. I think there's opportunity for coming up with creative proposals in that regard, or at least alluding to the fact that you'd be willing to explore it. Again, remember this RFI is going to be an evolving process, and that putting more cards on the table that in collaboration with the feds can be put together to make a really interesting combination is probably not going to hurt any community or state.
Well, that's a good thing to lead us into talking about siting. And so I'm going to pose this question in a little bit of a different way. When you're thinking about finding sites where you can implement your technology, what do you find most difficult to assess when selecting sites? And in that difficulty, how does that help you find a site to begin with? And I'll start with Rod.
Yeah, out on our website under our publications, we have a site evaluation framework, and it talks about geology and some of the data you would need, volcanism, seismicity, other things. But it also talks about community acceptance and alignment with the strategy and political aspects of your state. So you may have the best site from a geologic perspective, but the community may not want it. And so that's the part I think that you really just have to start having some of the conversations, learn about the technology. Some of this is complicated. Some of it's new and maybe not understood fully. And I think any of us were excited to talk about our technology, excited about the prospects of it, and would be happy to share that as we go through those discussions. But I think the kind of community and state engagement piece is the biggest part of siting.
Thank you. And same, Curtis, how about what do you find most difficult to assess when selecting sites?
Well, similar to what Rod was saying, the key aspect of this is not necessarily the physical attributes. Those can be clearly understood. You can do a site assessment. You can look at the geography. You can look at all of those aspects. But both the political and the community side are the areas where you're seeking some certainty. And our experience with our project in Oak Ridge, Tennessee for our uranium enrichment facility was greatly benefited and greatly moved along by the proactive efforts of the state, of the region, and of the community leaders. They had already cast a vision for what they wanted for nuclear energy, for what they wanted with their available land and sites and how those potentially could be used. And so by having that already framed up, it was much easier for us to look at that and see that that would be a site where we would fit. It was a community that supported and understood nuclear energy. There are educational institutions that had nuclear education programs already underway. We're looking at some of those, and so this is a community in a state that had done its homework and already implemented and proactively approached it. So that is what made those uncertainties more certain.
Thank you, Curtis. And Bill, I'll let you answer that same question. What's most difficult to assess when siting or
Yeah,
selecting a site?
I guess I would add to what Rod said and to Curtis, but I think we do not publicly post all of our setting criteria for different facilities. We have a variety of different places that we're trying to locate between our recycling, our fuel fabrication, obviously reactors themselves that we're going to build. Um, but it really is the qualitative as opposed to the quantitative that is the most challenging here. And we spent 2 years looking at where to put our initial recycling facility, which is planned for Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Obviously, the opportunity to supercharge that to do more in the context of the RFI still exists out there. We certainly have heard that there's such a profound interest in recycling at the federal level that there may be opportunities to expand or to add additional capacity at additional locations. And when we heard that, we had to kind of go back to what did we do over the past 2 years? And yes, there was a profound amount of technical analysis that created a down selected list of places that made sense. There was a lot of work done on the economics associated with every particular state, the workforce, all those things that start to go from quantitative to qualitative. But at the end of the day, I mean, when we were really coming down to our final decision, the question that kept coming back up and what made up our finalist list was where in the world do we think is going to be a place that is aligned from the community to the region, all the way up to the state level, that is going to be with us on this somewhat quixotic journey, which is anything in nuclear, over the coming decade, because there's going to be challenges. Nothing is going to be particularly easy. These are enormous capex projects that not only suffer from the difficulties that are associated with big infrastructure in America historically, but also the added interesting nuances of nuclear. And that really is an opportunity where the communities that do want to outperform relative to their purely empirical status have an opportunity to shine in this RFI. Because what we're looking for is, given the opportunity to potentially tap some of the more unique forms of financing creative infrastructure, given the opportunity to remove some of those burdensome regulatory challenges or regulatory burdens that weren't particularly effective at accomplishing their intended goals and served largely to stymie infrastructure. If we take some of those things off the table and bring new financing to the table, then it really changes the game, I think, for communities that want to show alignment up and down the political spectrum, but also willingness to be a good partner, and have a shared commitment to seeing long duration projects through. And that's just something that's kind of different than I think we've seen in a lot of other and other siting exercises. And that's not very particular, but it's where some communities just in this RFI have really jumped back on our radar in a totally different way because they've seized this opportunity to say, hey, we can take away some of the constraints empirically that might have not made us as competitive. When really what we need to show is that alignment, and that willingness to kind of go to bat and take advantage of this opportunity that's being put in front of us.
Thank you. I think you actually you led me into my next question, but before we get to that, we have a Q&A from one of our webinar watchers here, and I'll pose it to you, Bill. What are benefits and problems between pyro and aqueous reprocessing approaches?
So I don't want to get in trouble with my head of recycling, since I am not the head of our recycling program. But I will say at a macro level, what you see with what the French are doing versus what we're contemplating doing is primarily a difference in scale, difficulty, complexity, the footprint, and candidly, kind of the dirtiness of the process. We think there's a lot of advantages to pyroprocessing that are going to not just make profoundly more economical what the French and others have done on the aqueous side, but also make it less physically challenging, much less difficult to permit, and then a lot of negative externalities are taken away on the pyroprocessing side. So that's a shorthand that is, mostly, I guess, positive. If I had to kind of keep it at a layman's level and talk about, the risk factors, it isn't as industrialized of a process. We've kind of proven this at a smaller scale. So the execution risk associated with building a larger facility and all the concomitant issues that come up when you're building a first of a kind, all those are likely to be issues that, make the project longer, more challenging. I'm sure we'll hit different milestones that are, harder than we anticipate. But I do think what's interesting about it is perhaps the best way to think about power processing is that it was an opportunity that has been constrained by constraints that no longer exist. The two primary being regulatory, and the second being financing. The financing market for novel risk-on nuclear assets completely dried up over the past 30 to 40 years. And that dynamic has changed dramatically, not just with the anticipated federal support and all the other areas that we're exploring, but just the private markets themselves. We've seen more than I think the number is in the last 18 months, there's been more private capital raised, or more capital raised for nuclear ventures in the private markets than over the previous 10 years combined. I'll say from Oklo's perspective, we raised $2.5 billion in the last 7 or 8 months alone. Now that's equity capital that's different than the financing vehicles that we're going to need to scale up a larger power processing facility. But part of that narrative was specifically capital to be used for our first facility and for the first stages of recycling. And candidly, our issue right now, amazingly to say, is not fundamentally access to capital, but conviction on the timing and when to raise that capital. And then on the other side, the regulatory piece. I think it's fair to say that while we're far from perfect certainty in the entire nuclear world, we've never been in a place where we're better off relative to regulatory improvement and regulatory acceleration than we are currently. And we still see a high degree of bipartisanship. So if you put those two things together, it makes me think that the capital is there, the regulatory change is there, and then the X factor, the bipartisan support seems to still largely be there. And recycling is always has a little bit of sensitivity around it. So if you put all those things together, now's a great time to be leaning into scaling and industrializing a power processing facility.
Thank you. Curtis and Rod, anything to add to that?
Yeah, let me chime in then. Part of our purpose, or one of our primary roles in the recycling effort here in the United States, is to bring our expertise. We have not only with the technology, but agnostic to the technology, one still needs to know, how do you commission facility? How do you move the materials? What type of waste considerations? What type of sourcing considerations and workforce development considerations? And all of those are ones we have had, as I mentioned, many decades of experience, which is why we're glad to support those that are looking to stand up recycling here in the United States with our expertise. And so, like Bill said, it's a great opportunity. I think there's a lot of real strong interest, and so we're pleased to be bringing our expertise to help us out. We're happy for the call out by Secretary Wright a couple of weeks back on saying that he sees us as a key partner for bringing some of those reprocessing experience here to the U.S. And so a lot of great opportunity, I think, here.
And whether it's pyroprocessing or aqueous, both of them have waste at the end that can fit in a borehole. Our universal canister system has been designed to store, transport, put it in a mine repository or a borehole without repackaging at the end. So we're compatible with all the above, and look forward to supporting the nuclear on the back end.
Awesome. Thank you. As a community leader that's interested in attracting nuclear businesses to the region, I also am curious, well, how do I do that? But should companies co-develop plans for me, a community leader, to attract some business? And maybe, Rod, why don't you start that one off?
Yeah, I think the RFI, was looking for states and communities to kind of take a lead and look at what kind of collaboration you need. I know for us, we're very interested in the discussions. We recognize not all of them will go very far, but just even information gathering to better educate the communities on what's possible, what we can do, and potentially what you shouldn't do. But think about the back end as you think about the rest of that nuclear chain is important. For us, we want to be a good partner. We have just kind of tried to be as transparent as possible with our website and other information, putting it out there. And so hopefully that's a good resource as well. John, I think you're on mute. Sorry.
For deep, could you address retrievability from boreholes while you have the microphone there?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do put so for legacy fuel, you would put one assembly into a universal canister. We can place that underground. Our borehole in that disposal area would hold approximately 200 of those canisters. We can also handle, TRISO or vitrified waste out of reprocessing or other waste streams as well. But you can also retrieve that. The regulatory requirements in the US have required retrieval. And so we can manage that retrieval for a period of time. So we can do it for a shorter period of time or a longer period of time. If you let us know that up front, we can design and engineer that around it. So for example, we may need to use a different material to make sure that we don't have corrosion in the first 50 years. We can use corrosion inhibitors and other things as well. But just whatever you put in, we expect we'll be able to retrieve that out and have built the technology to go both ways.
Thank you. And Curtis, back to my first question there about so can you help companies work with other companies to co-develop site feasibility studies for community leaders like me that want to attract businesses to the region?
Yeah, most certainly. Part of, as I mentioned, our key role in for recycling here in the U.S. is support and applying our expertise. We've done studies for what does it look like to stand up recycling here in the United States. What are the education requirements? What are the R&D opportunities? Potential economic impact? All of those elements can be brought to bear on helping communities better understand this. And collaboration is key on this. When we went into the Oak Ridge area, they collaborated at every element. And where there are individual opportunities being brought up, our initial response is, great, let's bring that together as a group and let's talk about how that looks like as a single effort together, which greatly strengthens any offering. So I would greatly encourage communities that are looking at responding to this RFI to think collaboratively, as was mentioned earlier, across borders, across these dotted lines on maps that don't necessarily need to be there to strengthen a proposal for this effort.
Thank you. And Bill?
Yeah, I think the um, to complement what was already said, I think the opportunity really is to think creatively and to think, without some of the same constraints like I mentioned before. And I would also say, it may have come across in my answer to the, power processing question as if, we were leaning in particularly heavily in one direction. Obviously, Orano's got, decades of experience. In recycling, much more so than we do. And I think it's a good point about the complementarity of the technologies that are coming to bear in this RFI. We have mature companies, we have companies that are in between stages where Oklo is, and we have young companies. I think there's something to that in terms of the way that communities and states can lean in. And then bringing that kind of hybrid approach of different actors at different stages of maturity are going to make it more of a compelling offering on the federal side. I think one way that states and localities can make it, I think, more engaging, or they can be more engaged with companies like us, is to not, I think, presume, that there isn't something that could make sense. Because whether it's, the breadth of the work that Orano does and the type of facilities they have, whether it's kind of, I think, the flexibility that Rod and Deep Isolation and many other actors in this ecosystem have, There's a lot of willingness right now on the company side to think creatively, and I don't want to say it's zero cost for us to participate in a lot of different proposals. Obviously, that's not fair to say or accurate either. But one of the things that's unique about some of the more risk-on actors, or Oklo in particular, is that we just have exposure to more parts of the nuclear fuel ecosystem, and then the nuclear power deployment side. So we're really willing to explore, if given the context of the RFI, we should be rethinking some of our priors, again, across the host of different facilities that we have to build. And some states might have actors where something that they're doing with Orano or another partner makes a lot of sense, and then they might think, oh, well, we don't need to talk to Oklo or somebody else. I think keeping an open-minded approach right now is important, because there may be some areas where what we're doing and what Orano want to do are perfectly complementary through other aspects of the fuel cycle. So I know that's a not a particularly precise piece of feedback, but I would say keeping the net as broad as possible at this stage isn't going to be to your disadvantage, so long as you can find those interesting combinations that show something really unique about what you've managed to find in terms of the private partners that you would bring to the project. So keeping an open mind is, I guess, my feedback on that front.
Thank you. And that's a good place to talk a little bit about risk sharing. Um, what would you need? So take my community, for instance, what would you need from a state or a local government before putting your name behind a proposal? And I'll start with Rod on that one. And he's muted.
So you knew I was going to get busted at some point during this on a mute. But yeah, deep isolation is a little bit unique on this in that we're the only borehole disposal company in the nuclear sector globally, not just in the US. And so we don't really have others that, it's do you want to pick boreholes or not? Are you interested in disposal as part of your collaboration? And for us, we're happy to be non-exclusive and partner with other communities. The other nice thing about this is that we're modular, so you don't have to buy it all up front. This is kind of a step at a time. There can be go, no go milestones along the way, and we think that would help reduce the risk. So as you get into the site selection, if that site doesn't look good, it can stop. If the licensing doesn't look good, it can stop. That first borehole isn't, you don't have to drill, all of them at the same time. And so it is a little bit more manageable from that perspective.
Thank you. Bill, what does Oklo need from West Valley if, let's say, we are interested in having you come and do something there?
Well, I think I would answer that question by also answering one of the questions in the Q&A and pair them a little bit here. It looks like anonymous attendee, aptly named, raised the question about geology and technical development. These quantitative elements are very different than the local political support and the issues that are attendant there. I think that was to put more of a finer point on the comment I made earlier. If you look at, say, the Micron development that's happening in, I think it's upstate New York, one of the biggest, kind of domestic industrial investments that we've made in this country, obviously connected to, the broader chips and AI, early industrial policy that the United States has exercised over the past two administrations. I mean, it's a landmark project, and even that is being currently held up by a relatively small number of actors that are threatening to derail timelines. So I think we should go into this kind of activity eyes wide open, knowing that there is no silver bullet. We don't expect localities to come with an ironclad guarantee that we're not going to face challenges in any way, shape, or form. But I think what that does mean is that the right now what we're looking for is that creative demonstration of your engagement, your support, and your willingness to kind of lean in over the next coming decade, because of course we kind of have to think in longer timelines. There are places that have track records of negotiating difficult projects that are going to be at an advantage here, because there's nothing that speaks, more volumes than having gone through, a somewhat challenging project that is otherwise contested or sensitive. But at the same time, I think, again, this is where the RFI seems to be catalyzing a different approach, where the opportunity to bring a variety of different regional actors, not just state and local. I think the regional actors play an important role as well. Um, and then look at unusual, call it commitments compared to the normal economic development cycle. I'm not going to be looking for, again, and I don't think there is a city attorney's opinion that somehow gives me the kind of comfort for a project like this and tells me that it's de-risked. I think I'm going to be looking for those creative endeavors where there's contingencies baked into some of the incentives that are going to be offered. There's other demonstrations of particular support coming from the main actors involved, and then there's a huge amount of alignment up and down from local, regional, and at the state level. Again, I don't want to be too wishy-washy in my answer, but I also don't want to pretend as if we don't have something that doesn't really fit into a an easy bucket when it comes to projects like this.
Thanks. And how would Orano feel about what you need from my local community or a state before putting your name behind something?
The primary effort is similar to what Bill's talking about is a can-do attitude. There are going to be challenges with any of these RFI proposals. There's going to be times when you've got perhaps partners with different interests or different goals or those that are not directly aligned. But as we experienced with our enrichment facility development in Tennessee, is the can-do attitude that we're going to figure this out. We have a commitment to do this and we're going to figure it out. And that was expressed all the way from regional, state, local, all through the stakeholder elements. And so as we've talked about, the risk cannot be de-risked, but the effort to address it is the key point on this. If we're going to come in alongside with others, support them with our expertise and our effort, there's many different ways we can plug in and help, but the cooperative effort of getting it all together and getting it done, that's the kind of energy and commitment that lends durability to a community's proposal and perhaps some certainty then or some confidence that this is a good thing to be part of.
Thanks. Bill, what level of financial disclosure needs to exist to build trust without compromising any competitiveness, any business relationships you have?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different ways that you can have trust and confidence, and they're actually well represented here. Is that, and I assume that we're looking at this from the state and local perspective. One is obviously just the balance sheet. So the maturity of the business, the balance sheet, or the unique market role. Those are the three that I would look at. Obviously, Orano is a perfect example of a mature company that has decades of operating experience, and a mature business and credibility to boot. And so I suspect, Curtis, you're not getting a lot of hard questions on that front. Actors that are doing ambitious projects like ourselves at Oklo, and we're attempting to do a lot, not just build reactors, but build other parts of the fuel cycle. I think folks have to look at who are the partners and what's the capital that you've brought to bear, because the reality is that this is going to be a long, expensive project. And Oklo just announced an offtake partnership with Meta in January. And as I mentioned, I think our balance sheet is roughly $2.6 billion that we've raised recently. And obviously, the market is a pretty dynamic environment, but that's a non-trivial war chest for a company at our stage. And obviously, the partnership with Meta points to a certain degree of institutional credibility that will give us other access to capital. But that's areas where I would encourage states and localities to probe, take the next layer, ask the questions about what does that actually mean? What other relationships do you have? Why do you anticipate being able to finance the bigger endeavors that you're going to have? How much are you going to be dependent on, some of the federal policy that may or may not unlock additional financing vehicles? Those would be great, questions to grill us and others in our category with. I think Rod is in a unique space because he doesn't have to be the best capitalized. He has a unique market position and has a unique offering. And so you can have a certain degree of confidence based on different qualities of each of the companies. But certainly, I wouldn't hesitate to pose any of the tough questions. We expect them because of the ambition of what we're trying to accomplish. And I think in the same way, you could be skeptical if it felt like Oklo's ambitions, were too big. You could be skeptical because Curtis and Orano might have bigger corporate priorities, and they have to trade off other big questions of where they're going to invest. And then Rod's, I think at the kind of the in some sense a smaller stage endeavor. So all those there should be a healthy back and forth to see what is the appropriate degree of risk that a community and a state want to take in terms of their partners. Fortunately, right now, again, I think we don't have to have a do or die approach. I do think a lot of that is going to be sussed out in the subsequent phases of this RFI, but there's no reason not to have ask those questions up front and to begin, that conversation with your commercial partners in a frank way that really tries to hone in on the risks that might make them more or less valuable to your particular project. And just to be perfectly transparent, I mean, there's elements of our different CapEx investments that are more geographically limited in the places that we can put them. And so that will be a quantitative question that you would want to, get greater fidelity on how much risk there is associated with a commitment there. And then there are others that are more qualitative. Again, recycling has a different profile. It has a different impact on, the communities around it, et cetera. So I would just encourage states and localities. There's no reason, to take any of our, what we can contribute at face value, but also that's what we expect, and we hope to be good partners, to be open and transparent along those three vectors: market positioning, the size and maturity of the business, and of course, the balance sheet that you have to bring to bear.
Thanks. Curtis, do you want to take a stab at that one? What level of financial disclosure will build trust without, taking over competitiveness?
Right. So um, one might think that a $5 billion project like we've got underway in Oak Ridge would need a certain level of very high quality or high level of investments from our partners, from our communities for an interest there. Um, the important aspect that Tennessee put in place was to right up front, as we have this discussion, talk about what they can bring to the opportunity that they had structured for a company like ours to come into the community. And that was a very valuable conversation to have, a very valuable proactive effort on their part. And then for also funding with our facility, with our project, the DOE steps forward and provided us with 900 million in support of our project. Again, another aspect of key funding. And so I would encourage communities as they think about, do they want to attract certain types of companies? Do they want to think through certain types of financial opportunities to help that company better understand its opportunity in that community? And then how then that company structures its financial approach to a project being based and sited in different communities.
Thank you. Rod, do you want to take a stab at that one too?
Yeah, I thought Bill brought up partnerships, and I think it's important to know, deep isolation, we may be probably the smallest of the balance sheets out there right now, but we also have a huge supply chain, a lot of collaborations, and so we announced our master services agreement with Halliburton for drilling services that we can access around the globe. We've got MOUs in place with Amentum and Bechtel for EPC work and other nuclear handlers and such. So it is one of those where I think bringing the supply chain with you, the collaboration with you, a lot of experience and trust into those discussions is important. As we look at communities, it is one of those where we want to make sure that it's a two-way street. We've engaged pretty extensively with the communities near Cameron, Texas, with our full-scale demonstration, and have been doing that since 2018. So there is a lot to be learned through that, and we look forward to applying that to other communities going forward.
Thank you. I'm going to go to two of our Q&A questions here. The AI one, of course, is one of my favorites. So how can AI change our options for reprocessing and recycling, and what's going on in that vein, besides it needs a lot of power to make all these decisions? And I'll start with Bill on that one.
John, I said softballs only when I agreed to this panel. No, I kid. I think I'll answer this at a macro level and let Curtis go into uh, a more fine-toothed answer. How's that for teeing you up, Curtis? But I think on the AI front, what we've seen is it really is fundamentally changing it's fundamentally changing how we think about the nuclear ecosystem in two main ways. The first is, as was announced, well, literally yesterday at the White House, the relationship between the power that is going to be consumed by AI and the power that is going to have to be budgeted as part of the CapEx for the single greatest, consumers of energy, at least energy growth in the United States. That's a profound game changer. And I just went, it's sometimes hard for people to understand the total amount of capex we're talking about here. We are now significantly above any other collective human endeavor in history in terms of the amount of capital that's being put towards AI capex. And that's overwhelmingly by a handful of companies in the United States. And that number just keeps going up. So we're beyond the railroad era. We are truly living in the most interesting of times because the amount of dollars that institutional capital are trying to place are profound. And that does mean that the normal economics associated with any particular development are very different. I mean, the idea that a off-taker would just basically say, sure, we will more or less subsidize a bunch of other externalities associated with our investment and just pick up things like, guaranteeing that you're going to bring your own power. Query whether, of course, that's always the case. I mean, when you consume power, you beget future investment, but literally connecting the dots between the power that you're going to consume and the massive investments you're going to make. I do think uh, the AI industry is changing the game and how campuses like this, investments like this, projects in nuclear are going to be financed, or the logic that capital uses to make an investment decision. That's a broad statement, but that's because how these investments are being capitalized has profoundly changed. And that makes wildly ambitious things possible, but it also means that, cross subsidies to get rid of certain externalities associated with building new power and, the long-term issues associated with it, they're possible in a way that we couldn't have contemplated even 18 months ago. I think in the more narrow focus, I should say, the other way that AI is going to affect recycling and reprocessing is, and this is curiously enough, perhaps even a little bit more of a long-term issue, is that you are going to see a refinement, a faster iterative cycle on how we can get more value and more benefit out of the recycling facilities that we designed. We've already started to see this a bit at Oklo, and we see major actors in the AI world looking at applied AI models to help with not just reactor design, but through the entire life cycle. I'd point out, the nuclear company and the work that they're doing with Palantir for AI-enabled nuclear design, and a variety of other actors that are probably non-public now. So I think I can't point to specific examples that are going to transform reprocessing and recycling in the context of this RFI, but I do think that's an area where the capital landscape is going to be completely different, and it's going to change the economics of major investments like this and anything that touches energy. It already has, and it is going to continue to do so. And then the second is that you can expect a medium to long-term change in the iterative cycles for improving the design effectiveness and the ROI that you can get out of each incremental facility. And remember again that recycling and reprocessing are still in some ways very nascent industries in the U.S. We don't have the benefit that Orano has and others from decades of experience. And that's going to mean that there's both opportunities for improvement, but also lessons to be learned. And I think it's a great time to be able to confront those lessons with the benefit of the AI tools that are emerging and now being applied to the nuclear industry, as opposed to where we were 5 to 7 years ago.
Thank you. Curtis or Rod, do you want to weigh in on the AI part there? And then I've got one more Q&A question I want to get to.
Certainly. Let me give you two aspects as to how we at Orano are experiencing the AI impact. One that, as you may well know, France is primarily nuclear energy, and just recently made a commitment to continue to do so for a number of decades. Because of that, Orano is introducing or recreating, if you will, its recycling facility up in La Hague. We are expanding it. We're creating a new one or a revised version of the existing facility, and that's going to then operate for at least another 50 years. So the increase in nuclear energy, again, what do you do with the waste? France has taken the opportunity to continue its focus on recycling, reprocessing and recycling that waste, and then continue to gain value from it as nuclear energy continues to ramp up. So there's that value. There's that defined demand supply value there. And now for a kind of a hands-on aspect, what you may not be aware of is at our Malox facility where we create the MOX fuel, the recycled uranium fuel. We have an AI automated robot there called Hoxo. I think I say the name correctly. It's HOXO. Go out and take a look. There's a really cool video with him out there waving at you and doing things. But we have a humanoid robot that is looking to how we can use him to assist us in reprocessing, recycling at our facility, at our Malox facility. So not only is AI driving an energy demand, which is driving a demand for nuclear energy and then managing its full cycle, nuclear fuel cycle, but it's also starting to be implemented in support of nuclear energy and a closed nuclear fuel cycle.
Thanks. And Rod, how is AI working with the deep isolation?
We are leveraging it internally and find it definitely beneficial. It still hallucinates. You still have to review it, but editing is easier than writing from scratch, and it is a good kind of value addition. But we really, haven't incorporated that into our processes. We do have remote handled, but no robots involved at this stage.
Thanks. How our last one of our last Q&A questions here, how can we ensure that potential partners get the facts about how permanent repositories are actually a feature of a campus that can bring additional benefits for them and the nation? And I'll go back to Bill to start this one off.
And sorry, my connection is a bit unstable. Could you say that again, John?
Sure. How can we ensure that potential partners get the facts about how permanent repositories are actually a feature of a campus, a feature of a siting that can bring additional benefits for them and for the nation?
Oh, sorry, I see you answering the Q&A question. Sorry
Yeah,
about
sorry.
that. Well, obviously, I mean, this one is going to eventually boil down to Rob. So, Rod, I'm not going to steal too much of your thunder here. I'd say the dynamic that I would flag is that communities shouldn't underestimate the potential upside of having a campus proposal that at least regionally includes a long-term waste solution. And why is that? Because the long-term waste solution profoundly changes the game for a lot of economic models that currently we don't really have a good solution for. I think, if you compare, what we try to do when we try to export nuclear power, say with AP1000s, as compared to what the Russians do, having a solution to the back end of the fuel cycle, not just on the recycling side, but then also in the long-term storage, completely changes the game for what you can export to other countries. And so but also domestically in the U.S., if every community knew that there was a long-term storage solution that was able to address the waste problem that might otherwise be presented on a development near their community, you'd see a pretty big change in the openness and the appetite in a variety of places to host all sorts of different um, nuclear facilities, not just, of course, power, but anything that in any way contributes to waste. So long-term storage is essentially it's the key that unlocks huge economic growth because it solves the most, or at least dramatically reduces a lot of the most intractable aspects of the community support problem. So I think that's a reason why that was so heavily focused on in the RFI, is that that's how this administration views the long-term storage, and communities that have the geology, that have the support, and then have the right, conditions to explore long-term storage. It could be an incredible asset that they are able to then create a huge amount of economic opportunity around that. And I think what's interesting about this RFI is trying to use that as the ultimate carrot for these additional investments is a really interesting play because that really is trying to say what's the stickiest problem that holds back the growth of the nuclear industry, that holds back our own, not just our own energy sovereignty, but also kind of global energy dominance. Well, if you solve the long-term storage, then you can transform the game there, which means by virtue of taking on one of the more challenging aspects of the nuclear industry, communities should be appropriately rewarded. So, to the extent that communities think that they can make that a key feature of their application, it should be viewed as a remarkable asset. And everything that we've heard when we've talked to DOE and other actors suggests that they're going to view it the same way. So, I mean, I would just emphasize that it's a an opportunity, not a liability necessarily.
Thanks. And Rod, I think that was teed up to you.
Yeah, and agree. I mean, the export opportunities where you could, send fuel somewhere, they send it back for Orano or Oklo to reprocess and recycle, and then ship that waste back to that foreign country where deep isolation can construct a borehole and dispose of it permanently there is a real opportunity. We've looked at estimates, and we think that's over 10,000 U.S. jobs that would support that kind of activity globally for just deep borehole. So there is a lot of economic benefit that can actually happen with boreholes as well. But as I've said, reprocessing won't take care of every single isotope of waste. There's still a deep geologic repository needed. It doesn't have to be large, and it can definitely be modular and tailored to the community and state's impacts and what they need there. But there is a really good economic opportunity, and to make sure those future liabilities are maintained and controlled.
Thanks. Curtis, I'll give you just a chance to answer that, and then I'm going to wrap it up for today as we're just a little bit over now.
All right, so here's an opportunity for communities that are thinking we don't have the geology for a deep repository, an opportunity for collaboration. As part of this concept, you would need to have a consolidated interim storage facility where you receive the used fuel, you store it while it's being used for research or before it's reprocessed or any of those type of elements. And there's much more geography for which you can do that type of thing. For example, many of the or all of the reactors out there have on-site dry storage, which is an interim storage facility. And it's safe. It's proven safe. Again, we do that technology. We do those inspections. 20 years upon 20 years, we have not found concerns with that stored used nuclear fuel. So again, the technology is there, the processes exist, the capabilities exist. For communities who'd like to do collaboration, there's an opportunity here. So again, think broadly, think across those dotted lines of state borders or community borders, and think about how creativity can come up with a compelling offer.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for attending this today. As we wrap up today's discussion, if you'd like to continue learning more about new nuclear development, advanced nuclear technologies, and how communities can take a leading role in the build out of the nuclear supply chain, I encourage you to register for the ECA Forum, The Business of Nuclear, Communities and Industry Working Together, which will be held in Augusta from April 21st through April 24th. The forum brings together community leaders, industry, and federal partners to continue exactly the kind of conversation we started today. And if your local government needs assistance with travel to the forum, please reach out to the ECA staff. On behalf of the ECA, thank you very much for joining us today. It was a great session.